Vincent Romano's laughter echoed through the crystal ballroom of the casino, silencing even the orchestra hired for the night. All eyes turned to the woman in a grey uniform, holding a cleaning cloth with trembling hands. Isabella never imagined that those few seconds dancing, hidden in the corner of the private party, would change her life forever. What happened next left even the Mafia boss speechless. 4 hours earlier, Isabella Moretti had left home, leaving her 2 children sleeping. Thomas, 7 years old, and little Emma, only 4, rested peacefully in the 2-room apartment in the Bronx. With her brown hair tied in a practical bun and her fair skin marked by the exhaustion of years working multiple jobs, Isabella was a woman who drew attention for her natural elegance, even wearing the simple work uniform. Another weekend, working while they slept. Another night away from family out of pure necessity. At 30 years old, Isabella knew well the brutal routine of survival. During the week, she worked as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic in downtown Manhattan. The salary barely covered basic expenses. That's why, on weekends, she accepted extra work as a cleaning lady at luxury events organized by the city's criminal elite. It was a world completely different from hers, but one that paid well enough to keep dreams alive and children fed. That Saturday night, the job was at the Golden Crown Casino, property of Vincent Romano. The event was the annual gala of the Familia Romano, a pompous celebration where the underworld elite gathered to display power while flaunting fortunes built on blood and fear. The main ballroom was breathtaking. Baccarat crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like captured stars, reflecting golden light on the Italian marble floor, imported directly from Carrara. Round tables covered with black silk tablecloths were perfectly organized, each decorated with arrangements of red roses that cost more than Isabella's monthly salary. She knew that glamorous but shadowy world well, always from afar. For years, she observed while cleaning backstage at New York's most important theaters. She saw the ballerinas preparing, heard the music that made her heart race, memorized each movement with impressive precision. Dance had always been her secret passion, but dreams don't pay bills or treat a child's pneumonia. While organizing the last buffet tables, checking if each crystal glass was in the exact place, a waltz began to play. It was the Blue Danube by Strauss, the same music she danced alone at home when the children finally slept and she could be who she really was for a few precious minutes before exhaustion won. The sound of the orchestra filled the empty ballroom, creating a magical and hypnotic atmosphere. Isabella stopped what she was doing and closed her eyes, letting the melody envelope her completely like a long-awaited embrace. Without realizing it, her feet began to glide across the polished marble floor. There was no audience yet. The Mafia guests were on the private terrace for the initial meeting of the capos. It was just her, the music, and that moment of total and dangerous freedom. Her arms moved with the natural grace of someone born to dance, as if the grey janitor's uniform were a gala dress and the casino's empty ballroom were Lincoln Center. Each step was perfect, each turn an expression of years of dreams violently repressed by cruel reality. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Isabella was not the widowed mother struggling to survive in a hostile city. She was the ballerina she always dreamed of being, the artist that life had buried under layers of necessity and pain. It was exactly at that fatal moment that Vincent Romano entered the ballroom, accompanied by his henchmen. Vincent was an imposing and deeply intimidating figure. At 45 years old, his criminal empire built on extortion, illegal gambling, and trafficking was only surpassed by his reputation for calculated cruelty. He enjoyed humiliating people in public, especially when there was an audience to laugh along and validate his sick sense of absolute power. Standing at the entrance to the ballroom flanked by 2 armed bodyguards, he watched Isabella dance for a few seconds with an expression of surprise that quickly transformed into something much darker and predatory. A wicked smile formed on his lips when he saw the perfect opportunity for the night's entertainment that would soon begin. "Look at this," Vincent shouted, clapping in an exaggerated and sarcastic manner, his thick voice echoing through the walls. "Our cleaning lady is an artist." The music stopped abruptly when the conductor, confused and frightened, looked in the direction of the powerful voice that everyone feared. Isabella froze in the middle of a movement like a statue that had just come to life and was surprised by cruel and violent reality. The ballroom that seconds before was her dream stage now seemed like a gladiator arena where she would be massacred for others' amusement. The first guests began to enter, attracted by the boss's shout, and soon a curious and sadistic crowd formed to see what was happening with that insignificant woman. "Come here, dear," Vincent called with false gentleness, walking toward her like a predator who had found his unarmed and vulnerable prey. "Since you dance so well, how about a little performance for our illustrious guests?" The laughter began low, like a malicious murmur, that grew until it became a symphony of orchestrated humiliation. 500 people from the criminal underworld turned their gazes to Isabella, who felt her face burn with shame and her heart race with absolute panic. She tried to hide behind one of the marble columns, but it was impossible to escape. All eyes were fixed on her, dissecting every detail of her simple figure in brutal contrast with the criminal opulence around. "I was just working, sir," Isabella stammered, her voice almost inaudible amid the cruel buzz of the crowd of mobsters and their companions. "Working?" Vincent laughed even louder, ensuring everyone heard his mockery. "What you were doing was work. It looked more like delusions of grandeur, a maid who thinks she's a professional ballerina." The humiliation was complete and devastating, like a public execution. Isabella could feel the different types of looks coming from all sides. Condescending pity, elitist contempt, morbid amusement from those who fed on others' suffering. Some women covered in stolen jewels whispered malicious comments, while men in tuxedos openly laughed at the situation like hyenas around a wounded prey. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she fought against them with all the strength she still possessed. She would not cry in front of those people, would not give them that additional satisfaction of seeing her soul broken. It was when Vincent, realizing he had the total attention of the criminal audience, decided to elevate the spectacle to the next level of cruelty. "You know what?" he said theatrically, taking the Italian leather wallet from his Armani tuxedo pocket and waving a $100 bill as if it were a pathetic trophy. "If you dance the waltz, I'll clean the hall." How about it, folks? Want to see our Cinderella try to be a real princess while the prince watches? The silence that followed was deafening and charged with tension. Even the terrified waiters stopped serving French champagne to watch the cruel spectacle unfolding in the center of the casino ballroom. Isabella stared fixedly at the bill in Vincent's hand. $100. It was only a fraction of what she needed, but the public humiliation was worth much more in future consequences. "And if I succeed?" Isabella asked, surprising absolutely everyone with the sudden courage that emerged from her trembling but determined voice. Vincent guffawed, as if he had heard the most absurd joke in the criminal world. "If you manage to impress me, and I deeply doubt you will, I'll give you $5,000 and even clean this entire ballroom with my own hands." A murmur of total disbelief ran through the crowd, like an electric shockwave. Vincent Romano, the man who ordered executions without blinking cleaning a ballroom, was absolutely unthinkable and hilarious. "But if you embarrass yourself, and you certainly will, you'll never work at any event in this city again. I'll personally make sure of that, and you know what that means coming from me." Isabella felt her legs tremble, but not from paralyzing fear. It was pure adrenaline running through her veins like liquid fire. $5,000 could completely change her and her children's lives for entire months. Medical appointments, medicines, winter clothes, maybe even some dance classes for herself to reclaim what she lost. "I accept," she said, her voice now firm as tempered steel and determined as it had never been in her entire life. Vincent smiled with pure malice, like a demon who had just closed a bloody contract. "Excellent, maestro. Play the most difficult and complex waltz you know." Let's see what our artist is really capable of before embarrassing herself. What no one in that ballroom controlled by the Mafia knew was that Isabella Moretti was not just a common cleaning lady trying to survive. She kept a secret that not even her children knew completely in its magnitude and depth. 15 years earlier, Isabella was known as the Pearl of Manhattan, one of the most promising ballerinas in all of New York. At just 15 years old, she was already dancing in the corps de ballet of the Metropolitan Opera House and was pointed out as the future prima ballerina of the country's most prestigious company. Her childhood had been built entirely around classical dance. Her mother, Catherine, worked double shifts as a seamstress in a clothing factory in the textile district to pay for the very expensive classes at the Imperial Ballet Academy. On Saturdays, Isabella woke up at 5 in the morning for 3 hours of intense training before regular classes that extended until late afternoon. Sundays were dedicated to special rehearsals with the best teachers on the East Coast. "You have something special, girl," Professor Dmitry Volkov, a rigorous Russian who had danced at the Bolshoi, always said. "Your technique is impeccable, but there's a strength in your movements that comes straight from the soul." A ballerina with your talent can open doors not just for herself, but for an entire generation of artists. At 17 years old, Isabella received a full scholarship to study at the ballet school of the Paris Opera. It was any American ballerina's dream to train with the best in the world in the birthplace of classical dance and perhaps earn a spot in Europe's most prestigious company. But life had other cruel plans reserved for her. 3 days before traveling to Paris, Catherine had a sudden stroke in the middle of the factory. Within hours, the strong woman who supported the family alone was bedridden, needing comprehensive and very expensive medical care that insurance didn't cover. Isabella didn't hesitate for even a second, refused the scholarship that would change her life, and stayed to care for the mother who had sacrificed everything for her. Catherine whispered with difficulty for her daughter to go and realize their dream, but Isabella responded, massaging her mother's paralyzed hands, that Paris could wait, and that now the dream was to see her get better. Paris didn't wait, as she naively imagined. The scholarship went to another European girl, and Isabella had to work multiple jobs to pay for expensive medicines and physical therapy that consumed all available money. She got some jobs as a dance teacher for rich children in Manhattan, but the salary was completely insufficient for growing medical needs. That's when she met Michael, a caring young man of Irish origin who worked as a mechanic in Queens, and loved her exactly as she was, without requiring her to be a star. Michael said she didn't need to dance to be special because she was already perfect the way she was with or without stages. At 19 years old, Isabella was pregnant with Thomas. At 21, Emma came into the world with the same green eyes as her grandmother. Michael was a present and loving father working overtime so Isabella could stay home with the children and care for Catherine. Catherine improved significantly with dedicated care and got to know the grandchildren she loved deeply. She said, watching Isabella play with the children, that now she had a beautiful family, and that dance had been just the beginning of her true story. For a few years, Isabella was genuinely happy, despite constant financial difficulties. She danced at home for the children who laughed and tried to imitate their mother's graceful movements with their clumsy little legs. Michael always said he would save money for her to return to studying dance when the children grew up enough. But tragedy came knocking violently on their door again. Michael died in a construction accident when Thomas was 5 years old and Emma only 2. A poorly secured steel beam fell from scaffolding, fatally striking him at a construction site in Brooklyn. Isabella lost not only her beloved husband, but all the financial and emotional stability the family possessed. Catherine, who had partially recovered, worsened drastically with the shock of losing the dear son-in-law she treated as a son. Isabella found herself alone with 2 small children, a gravely ill mother, and no stable or predictable source of income. It was when cruel reality definitively imposed itself on the dreams that still remained. Thomas asked one night, seeing his mother cry after another day, desperately looking for work, why she didn't dance anymore like before. Isabella responded, drying her tears, that sometimes life violently changes plans, but that doesn't mean we stop dreaming completely, even when everything seems impossible. The first stable job she got was at the veterinary clinic. Dr. Marcus, the owner, was a kind man who knew of her desperate situation and offered a fair salary with flexible hours, but still it wasn't enough for everything they needed. Catherine died last winter from cardiac complications, leaving Isabella even more alone in the hostile world. Now it was just her and the 2 children, against all imaginable difficulties impossible to overcome alone. The extra jobs as a cleaning lady arose out of pure and desperate necessity. An acquaintance from the clinic recommended the events company that served the criminal elite, and Isabella discovered she could earn in one weekend the equivalent of an entire week at the veterinary reception. She told herself while putting on the grey uniform that there was nothing wrong with working honestly to support her children. Every profession had its inherent dignity regardless of what society thought, but deep in her heart, every time she heard classical music at the Mafia events, something inside her moved painfully. Her legs tingled to dance. Her arms wanted to tell stories in the air with movements her soul still remembered perfectly. Her entire body cried out for the art that had once been her reason to live and breathe. That's why that night at the Golden Crown Casino, when the Blue Danube began to play, Isabella simply couldn't resist the call. For a few precious and stolen minutes, she returned to being who she really was deep in her soul before life transformed her into a survivor. And now, standing in the center of the ballroom with 500 dangerous people watching her, Isabella knew this was the most important and risky moment of her life since she lost Michael. $5,000 meant 3 months of rent, paid in advance medical appointments for Emma winter clothes for Thomas, and maybe the chance to dream of dance professionally again. But if she failed, she would never get work at events in the city again, because Vincent Romano had enough power to completely ruin her reputation and make her life hell. The conductor looked at her with genuine curiosity, mixed with pity. "What waltz would you like to dance, miss?" he asked respectfully. Isabella took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and whispered with cold determination, "The most difficult one, you know. I can handle whatever comes." In the audience, some people began to settle in better to watch the show, expecting a memorable humiliation. Vincent crossed his arms with total arrogance, absolutely certain that in a few minutes he would be laughing at the complete humiliation of that insignificant woman. He had no idea what he was about to witness that night that would change everything. While Isabella prepared mentally for the most important challenge of her life, Vincent Romano savored every second of the situation with sadistic pleasure. For him, this wasn't just cheap fun, it was a demonstration of absolute power that fed his sick ego and his need for control. Vincent was born with a silver spoon, the only son of a traditional Sicilian mafia family in New York. At 12 years old, he was already humiliating less fortunate schoolmates with calculated psychological violence. At 20, he inherited a fortune and a criminal empire that he multiplied through questionable illegal businesses, always stepping on whoever was necessary to expand his territory. His specialty was destroying dreams and hopes of vulnerable people. 3 years earlier, during a similar party at the casino, he had ruined the career of a young pianist named David. The young man, son of immigrants, played magnificently, but Vincent created a humiliating situation that made him give up music forever and work in a warehouse. Vincent said at the time, with calculated coldness, that poor people's place was serving the mafia, not showing off as if they were equal to the powerful. 2 years ago, it was Sarah's turn, a talented chef who worked at the buffet of one of his exclusive events. When she dared suggest an improvement to the traditional menu, Vincent ridiculed her publicly and ensured she never got work at quality restaurants in the entire city again. Vincent used to tell his henchmen that people like that needed to learn where their place was, otherwise they got ideas above their miserable reality. Vincent had a specific and tested method for psychologically destroying people. First, he created a situation where the victim felt tempted to show talent or knowledge they possessed. Then, he established bets or challenges practically impossible to fulfill under extreme pressure. When the person inevitably failed, he used his vast influence to ensure the consequences were absolutely devastating and lasting. His network of contacts was vast and deeply toxic for anyone who crossed him. Owners of legitimate and illegal businesses, theater directors, event producers, all owed bloody favors to Vincent or depended on his dirty investments to survive. A word from him could open doors, but could also close them permanently and ruin entire lives with a simple phone call. Vincent's rich and equally cruel friends laughed, saying he had an incredible nose for identifying who was trying to be more than they really were in the world. Actually, Vincent had a sharp nose for identifying genuine talent in vulnerable people, and that terrified him deeply in the depths of his empty soul. At 45 years old, he had never created anything of real value for the world. His fortune came from criminal inheritance and brutal illegal activities. His charity foundation was just an elaborate facade for money laundering and tax benefits through corrupt accountants. He had no artistic talents, genuine special skills, or any significant contribution to society beyond fear and violence. That's why whenever he saw someone with real and legitimate talent, especially someone of humble and vulnerable origin, he felt a deep and completely irrational anger grow in his chest. It was as if the existence of these people were a constant and painful reminder of his own mediocrity, disguised as power and stolen wealth. That night, when he saw Isabella dancing alone in the ballroom with such grace, Vincent felt that familiar anger rise up his chest like bitter bile. Her natural gracefulness, the evident passion in each precise movement, the perfect technique hidden under the simple janitor's uniform, all of this bothered him deeply and stirred his buried insecurities. Vincent thought with contempt that here was another one who thought she was special when she was nothing but disposable trash. He would show her and everyone present what the brutal reality of their world was. Vincent had absolute and unshakable certainty that Isabella would fail miserably under the pressure. After all, she was just a 30-year-old cleaning lady, probably without recent formal training, trying to dance an extremely complex waltz in front of 500 dangerous people from the criminal elite. The psychological pressure alone would be more than enough to completely destroy her, and he would savor every second of the destruction. But there was another dark reason for his arrogant confidence. He had secretly instructed the conductor before the event to choose the Emperor Waltz by Strauss, one of the most technically challenging pieces in the entire classical repertoire, with abrupt rhythm changes and movements that required years of intensive professional training. Vincent whispered in conductor Santini's ear while Isabella was preparing to play that waltz. They had discussed the most difficult possible and play it at the fastest tempo physically possible. The conductor, who owed enormous financial favors to Vincent, just nodded discreetly, knowing he had no choice but to obey. Vincent had also given specific instructions to some of his cruelest associates in the criminal audience. When she starts to embarrass herself, laugh loudly and make humiliating comments, he instructed coldly. I want her to feel the full weight of public humiliation and never dare dream above her miserable condition again. Tony Marcelli, an equally despicable and violent businessman, smiled wickedly. You really have no mercy at all, Vincent, he said, with sick admiration. Mercy is for the weak and fools, Vincent responded coldly. I'm doing her a brutal favor, showing her where her place is before she hurts herself even more, with pathetic and impossible fantasies. Veronica Castellano, a crime socialite known for her sharp tongue and refined cruelty, was already preparing the most venomous, malicious comments. poor thing thinks she's a professional ballerina," she said with contempt. "It's going to be absolutely hilarious to see reality violently hit her in the face when she collapses under pressure." Vincent observed Isabella in the center of the illuminated ballroom and felt an anticipated and sick satisfaction. In a few minutes, another inferior person would learn the lesson not to dream too high without serious consequences. What he didn't know was that his arrogance was about to turn against him in an absolutely spectacular and unforgettable way. Dr. Elena Martinelli, one of the most respected guests and least involved with crime at the party, observed the scene with growing moral discomfort. She was artistic director of Lincoln Center and had dedicated her entire career to identifying and nurturing genuine talents regardless of social origin. When she saw Isabella dancing alone minutes before, Helena was deeply impressed with the impeccable technique and absolutely natural artistic expression of the woman. Helena thought this wasn't cheap amateurism, but rather the work of someone with extremely serious and dedicated professional training. Dr. Helena had known Vincent for years through social events and knew exactly what his cruel and predictable game was. She had witnessed other similar situations of public humiliation and always bitterly regretted not interfering when she could have made a difference. This time would be completely different, and she was determined. While Vincent savored his anticipated wickedness with sadistic pleasure, Dr. Helena positioned herself strategically in the front row, ready to intervene if necessary. She had a strong feeling that this night would be absolutely special and transformative. Vincent said aloud, ensuring everyone heard his order, "Conductor, play the most difficult one without any mercy. I want to see if our improvised artist is really up to her ridiculous pretensions before she collapses." The cruel smile on his face was the personification of human evil in its purest and most distilled form. Isabella took a deep breath in the center of the ballroom, closed her eyes, and waited for the music to begin, with her heart beating hard. Vincent crossed his muscular arms, covered by the expensive tuxedo, absolutely certain that in a few minutes he would be laughing at the greatest humiliation he had ever orchestrated in his entire criminal career. What Vincent couldn't imagine, even in his most absurd nightmares, was that in the last 6 months, Isabella had secretly returned to training classical dance intensively. It all began when Emma had a severe asthma attack and had to be rushed to the overcrowded public hospital. During the anguishing long nights at the hospital, Isabella met Sofia Petrov, a 78-year-old lady who was visiting her grandson in the same pediatric ward. Sofia said in their first conversation that Isabella had the bearing of a professional ballerina and that she herself had danced a lot in her golden era. "I recognize a colleague when I see one even decades later," the elderly woman said with experienced eyes. Isabella smiled sadly, admitting she had danced long ago, but that was buried in the past, along with other dreams. Sofia laughed gently, saying that dance doesn't stay in the past, like a forgotten object. It stays in the soul, patiently waiting for the right time to return to the surface when least expected. During the endless nighttime conversations at the hospital, Isabella discovered that Sofia had been prima ballerina of the Metropolitan Opera House in the 60s during its golden era. She knew perfectly Isabella's promising trajectory because she had even attended some of her performances when she was a prodigy teenager. Sofia exclaimed emotionally that Isabella was the Pearl of Manhattan about whom everyone spoke. She remembered perfectly and said that Dmitri Volkov spoke of Isabella as if she were his spiritual daughter, saying she would be the greatest American ballerina of all time. Tears came to Isabella's eyes when she heard the old professor's name. She confessed that life had violently changed her plans and destroyed her dreams. Sofia replied with wisdom that life radically changes plans, but doesn't destroy genuine talents that lie dormant. The body still remembers every movement perfectly, I'm absolutely certain of that. When Emma was released from the hospital after days of treatment, Sofia made a completely unexpected invitation. Come to my house on Sunday afternoons. I have a complete studio in the basement that I don't use anymore. We can remember the old times, and you can feel what it is to dance for real again." Isabella hesitated initially because Sunday was her only complete day of rest, when she stayed entirely with her children without working. Sophia gently insisted that she bring the children who could play in the large garden while they talked in the studio. "It will be good for everyone, especially for you to recover part of yourself that you lost." The first Sunday was just a nostalgic conversation about classical technique and golden memories. Sophia showed old yellowed photographs, recalled great historical performances, spoke passionately about the European masters she met throughout her international career. On the second Sunday, she asked Isabella to do some basic movements just to see if the body still remembered after so long. The body not only remembered perfectly, it desperately begged to dance again. Sophia whispered with tears in her eyes, seeing Isabella do an absolutely perfect grand jeté. "It's as if you had stopped training just yesterday and not 15 years ago. Your technique is completely intact, waiting to be freed." From the third Sunday on, they established a sacred and disciplined routine. While Thomas and Emma played in the garden under the supervision of Sophia's loyal housekeeper, Isabella and the elderly woman worked intensively in the improvised but well-equipped studio in the basement of the house. Sophia constantly said not to think of this as returning to the stages, but rather as essential therapy for the wounded soul. Your body urgently needs this specific language to feel complete and functional again after so long buried in survival. For 6 months, every Sunday religiously from 2 to 5 in the afternoon, Isabella rediscovered dance with an intensity she hadn't felt since adolescence. Sophia, despite her advanced age, was still an absolutely exceptional and rigorous teacher. She meticulously corrected postures, suggested deep emotional interpretations, shared rare technical secrets she had learned with the great European masters during her international career. Sophia remembered one Sunday that the Emperor Waltz had always been Isabella's specialty as a teenager. "You danced it with impressive and unusual maturity for someone so young at that time." Isabella lied, saying she didn't remember it right anymore, when in truth she remembered perfectly every measure and every movement, as if it were engraved in her soul. Sophia suggested refreshing her memory, and so they worked on the extremely complex waltz for 3 consecutive Sundays. Sophia played piano with still, skillful fingers, while Isabella danced tirelessly, the elderly woman correcting every microscopic detail with the surgical precision of someone who had dedicated their entire life to that sublime art. In the last rehearsal before the event at the casino, Sophia said with absolute conviction, "Perfect, you're even technically better than you were at 17. The pain and brutal experience of life have given a devastating emotional depth to your movements that you simply didn't have before for lack of life experience." Thomas and Emma loved watching their mother dance in the garden through the basement window. Thomas observed that Mommy became completely different when she danced, as if she were another person. Emma agreed, saying it seemed she became taller, more beautiful and happier than they ever saw at home. Sophia always ended the Sunday meetings with the same prophetic phrase, "Talent like yours cannot and will not remain hidden forever. One day life will give an unexpected opportunity, and you need to be absolutely ready to seize it without hesitation." Isabella never imagined that opportunity would arrive in such a brutal and humiliating way in a casino controlled by the Mafia. In the week before the event at the Golden Crown Casino, she had trained the Emperor Waltz one last time at Sophia's house with maximum intensity. Sophia said mysteriously that she felt something extremely important was going to happen very soon in Isabella's life. When Isabella asked how she could feel that without any evidence, Sophia responded that 60 years of stage teach a person to sense life's decisive moments before they happen. Sophia instructed Isabella to trust her and mainly trust herself when the moment arrived. Now standing in the center of the Golden Crown Casino ballroom, Isabella heard her friend's prophetic words echoing in her mind like a protective mantra. Her muscles were perfectly prepared, her technique was sharper than ever, her interpretation was mature and deep. She took a deep breath, fully expanding her lungs, and assumed the classic initial position of the waltz with impeccable posture. In the audience, Dr. Helena Martinelli observed Isabella's absolutely perfect posture and felt a shiver of expectation run down her spine. This woman knows exactly what she's doing, she thought with growing admiration. Vincent, noticing the sudden and inexplicable confidence in Isabella's erect posture, felt a first thin thread of uneasiness cross his stomach. "It's impossible," he murmured to himself. "She can't be that good, she's just a miserable cleaning lady trying to show off." Conductor Santini raised the baton with authority, looked at Isabella one last time in the eyes, and smiled discreetly with respect. He also recognized a true professional when he saw one after decades of conducting. The Emperor Waltz in the original tempo, he announced loudly, completely ignoring Vincent's cruel instructions to play faster and make it harder. Isabella closed her eyes, heard the first majestic chords, and let 15 entire years of repressed longing explode in pure and liberating movement. The transformation was instantaneous, absolutely magical and impressive for anyone who understood dance. The first powerful chords of the Emperor Waltz filled the ballroom like a controlled and majestic storm. Isabella didn't move for 3 entire measures, remaining completely motionless, like a marble statue in the center of the improvised stage. Vincent smiled with malice, thinking he had defeated her. Already frozen with nerves, he whispered to Tony Marcelli, "This is going to be easier than I imagined." But Dr. Helena Martinelli immediately recognized what was happening with experienced eyes. Isabella wasn't frozen with fear, she was counting the musical beats with professional precision, preparing to enter at the exact moment the classical choreography required. It was the unmistakable posture of an extremely experienced professional. On the 4th measure, Isabella slowly opened her eyes. What happened next left the entire ballroom in absolutely total and shocked silence. She began with a slow and majestic port de bras, her arms drawing absolutely perfect arcs in the air, while her feet glided in impeccable pas de bourrée that barely touched the floor. Each movement was executed with technical precision that bordered on impossible mathematical perfection. But there was something much deeper than mere technique, a devastating emotional expressiveness that transformed cold technique into pure and transcendent art. Veronica Castellano whispered, completely forgetting the carefully prepared venomous, malicious comments. "My God, she is completely professional at international level." In the first rotation of the waltz, Isabella executed a series of chaînés turns that covered the entire impressive extension of the ballroom with controlled speed. Her turns were perfectly controlled, as if she had an invisible axis running through her body. Her posture remained erect as a spear even in rapid movement. Her arms maintained the impeccable classical form without the slightest deviation. It was technically perfect in a way that left professionals speechless. Vincent felt the first uncomfortable tightening in his stomach, squeezing his guts. "Impossible," he murmured with a hoarse voice. "A miserable cleaning lady can't dance like this, no way." But that was just the beginning of what was to come. When the music dramatically accelerated to the second movement, Isabella responded instantly with a devastating combination of grand jeté and assemblées that demonstrated not just refined technique, but absolutely impressive physical strength. Each leap reached a perfect height, defying gravity for impossible seconds. Each landing was completely silent, like a feather touching the floor without making the slightest noise. It was superhuman in execution. Dr. Helena Martinelli had tears streaming freely down her face, not caring about her makeup. 25 years directing international ballet companies, and she had rarely witnessed a performance as absolutely complete as this before her eyes. She's not just dancing, thought Helena emotionally. She's telling her entire life story through the movements, and each gesture carries years of pain. That was exactly what was happening in that transcendent moment. Each precise gesture of Isabella carried the entire 15 years of violently repressed and buried dreams. When she extended her arms in grand port de bras, she was symbolically embracing all the children in the world she couldn't raise, as she would have liked for lack of resources. When she executed the vertiginous turns, she was spinning away from all the pain and accumulated humiliation she suffered for years. When she leaped high, she was jumping over all the impossible obstacles that life had cruelly placed in her path. It was dance as pure emotional catharsis. The criminal audience was completely hypnotized, forgetting who they were. In the extremely challenging third part of the waltz, the most technically complex of the entire piece, Isabella executed a devastating sequence of grands fouettes that drew audible, admiring sighs, even from the experienced musicians of the orchestra. There were 16 consecutive perfect turns, each executed with absolute control over every muscle. Her extended leg drew geometrically perfect circles in the air, while her body spun on the same fixed point. It was something only world-elite ballerinas could execute, and she made it look easy. Vincent was visibly pale as a corpse. His hands trembled uncontrollably as he watched his planned public humiliation unfold in inverted form before his incredulous eyes. "This can't be happening," he repeated mentally in absolute denial. "She's just a miserable employee. This can't be real." Tony Marcelli had completely forgotten to laugh, as had Veronica and all the other cruel henchmen who had come specifically to enjoy the brutal humiliation of others. Now they were just completely absorbed spectators of a performance that very few theatres in the entire world had the privilege to receive, even paying fortunes. But it was in the final moment that Isabella elevated absolutely everything to a transcendental and spiritual level. When the music reached the dramatic final crescendo, she positioned herself in the exact center of the ballroom and executed the most difficult sequence of the entire waltz, a lethal combination of tours en l'air, Sisson fermé, and grand cabriole that required not just absolutely perfect technique, but also deeply emotional, dramatic interpretation. She danced her complete story in those final moments. She danced as a woman who always had to be 10 times better to get half the opportunities. She danced her piercing pain, her impossible daily struggle, the unconditional love for her children, the eternal longing for her dead husband, the iron determination to survive against all odds, the stubborn hope for better days that might never come. Each movement was a specific word, each sequence a complete sentence of a beautiful and devastatingly painful story, told through the universal language of dance that transcends words. When the triumphant final chord arrived, Isabella ended in an absolutely perfect reverence. Her head bowed, her arms in fifth classical position, her breathing surprisingly controlled, as if she had just woken from a beautiful dream that lasted an entire lifetime. The silence that followed was total and absolutely sepulchral. For 15 eternal seconds that seemed like hours, 500 people remained completely motionless, mentally processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't possible that a simple, invisible cleaning lady had just executed one of the most perfect performances they had ever seen in their entire lives. Vincent was in complete and paralyzing shock. His mouth was open, his eyes wide, his mind desperately struggling to process the impossible reality. The woman he had tried to publicly humiliate had just demonstrated a talent that very few people in the entire world legitimately possessed. Dr. Helena Martinelli was the first to break the heavy silence. "Brava!" she shouted dramatically, rising from her chair with tears running freely down her face. "Brava!" Like a powerful wave, the entire audience rose in thunderous ovation. 500 people clapping frantically, shouting brava in unison, some openly crying, moved by the pure beauty of what they had just witnessed. Isabella slowly raised her head, still in shock at her own performance and the reaction. For a few transcendent minutes, she had been again the ballerina she was always meant to be since childhood. She had danced with the same passion and perfection as when she was a prodigy teenager, but now with the devastating emotional depth that only brutal life can teach. Vincent remained seated, rigid pale as a ghost, watching his public humiliation unfold in torturous slow motion. Several guests had already approached Isabella to congratulate her, effusively treating her as the absolutely exceptional artist she clearly was. An elegant lady covered in diamonds was asking where she had studied with such quality. A man in a tuxedo was asking when she would perform publicly again. A young woman with eyes shining with genuine admiration was inquiring if she had a manager, because she needed to have one. But it was Dr. Helena Martinelli who approached with the question that would absolutely change everything. "What is your full name, dear?" she asked, holding Isabella's hands. "Because you just did a performance that I will never forget in my entire career." Vincent knew deeply that he had lost completely and publicly, and the worst was still to come, inevitably. Isabella Moretti. She responded with her voice still trembling with pure emotion, discreetly wiping the tears that began to flow during the endless applause. "My full name is Isabella Moretti, Doctor." Helena Martinelli held Isabella's hands with reverent delicacy, like someone touching an extremely precious and fragile work of art. "Isabella, how long has it been since you performed professionally on stages?" 15 years, Isabella whispered with a broken voice. "I haven't performed in 15 entire years since I was 17. A murmur of absolute disbelief ran through the nearby guests who heard. How was it possible to maintain such absolutely perfect technique after so long completely away from stages and professional training? It was superhuman in the dedication required. "Impossible," said Dr. Helena, shaking her head in deep admiration. "What you just did was pure art at the highest level. Very few ballerinas in the entire world can transmit such devastating emotion while maintaining absolute technical perfection simultaneously." Vincent finally stood up rigidly from his chair, desperately trying to regain control of the situation he himself had stupidly created. His face was red with impotent rage and deep humiliation, but he knew he couldn't simply flee cowardly. Hundreds of people were watching, many compulsively filming with cell phones. "Very beautiful," he said, with a forcedly casual voice, walking toward Isabella with measured steps. "I really didn't expect that at all." His eyes met hers, and for the first time in his entire life, Vincent Romano felt genuinely small and insignificant before another person. There was something in Isabella's serene expression, not cheap arrogance, but an absolutely unshakable dignity that he had never possessed despite all his stolen wealth and criminal power. "Mr. Romano," said Dr. Helena with a firm and authoritative voice, "I believe you owe some specific words to this extraordinary lady, and I'm not referring just to empty words." Vincent swallowed hard with difficulty. He had made the bet publicly in front of hundreds of dangerous witnesses. Some had even recorded his initial cruel comments on video. There was absolutely no way to escape what he had promised so arrogantly. "You danced well," he admitted reluctantly, with each word coming out like broken glass. "Very well, actually better than I expected." "Well," Dr. Helena exploded indignantly. "Mr. Romano, what we just witnessed was one of the most extraordinary performances I've seen in 40 entire years of international artistic career. This woman didn't simply dance well, she danced magnificently in a transcendent way." Other influential guests began to speak up, supporting Helena. Professor Santini, the conductor, approached with eyes shining with genuine emotion. "In 50 years conducting orchestras around the world," he said, with his still strong Italian accent, "I've rarely seen anyone interpret Strauss with such technical precision and deep feeling simultaneously. Madam, you are a true artist, in the purest sense." Richard Morrison, art critic for New York's most important newspaper, was pushing people to get close to Isabella urgently. "We need to talk immediately," he said with excitement. "New York needs to know that we have a talent of this extraordinary magnitude working in cleaning," Isabella completed without any shame. "I work in cleaning to support my 2 small children." The silence that followed was extremely charged with collective emotion. The audience finally completely understood the magnitude of the situation. This wasn't just a technically impressive performance, it was the devastating story of an exceptional artist whom life had cruelly pushed into social invisibility. "My children," Isabella murmured suddenly, remembering the reality outside. "They're home alone now. I need to—" "Wait, Doctor." Helena interrupted firmly, holding her arm. "Before anything else, this gentleman has a serious debt to pay publicly." All eyes turned threateningly to Vincent, who was visibly uncomfortable under scrutiny. He knew deeply that he had no choice whatsoever. He took out $500 bills from his leather wallet with extremely reluctant movements. "Here are the 5,000, he said, extending the money with evident ill will. "And the rest of the bet?" asked Dr. Helena with an icy smile that didn't reach her eyes. Vincent became completely livid. "The rest you clearly said you would clean the entire ballroom with your own hands if she managed to impress you." Tony Markelli reminded him, who now seemed to be enjoying the growing discomfort of his former friend enormously. "And man, she didn't just impress, she left absolutely all of us in complete ecstasy." "I was obviously joking," Vincent stammered desperately. "Joking?" Dr. Helena's voice became absolutely icy. "So when you publicly humiliated this lady half an hour ago, were you also joking? When you made extremely cruel comments about her delusions of grandeur, were you joking then?" The entire ballroom was watching the tense confrontation. Many guests had cell phones in hand, recording every compromising second. Vincent acutely realized that if he didn't fully comply with the bet, the scandal would be much worse for his reputation and authority. "All right," he said through gritted teeth. "But I'm not going to clean the entire ballroom. That's completely ridiculous." "A bet is a bet," Professor Santini said firmly with moral authority. "A man of honor keeps his publicly given word." Vincent looked around desperately, seeking support among his associates, but found only looks of almost hostile expectation. Even his closest, most loyal friends seemed to be waiting for him to fulfill what he promised without exception. With completely rigid movements of contained rage and humiliation, Vincent took off his expensive tuxedo jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his Italian white shirt. A waiter, understanding the situation perfectly, brought a broom and a cleaning cloth. "You don't need to clean everything," Isabella said softly, speaking for the first time since she received the saving money. "Just wipe the cloth where I danced. I think that's more than sufficient." It was a gesture of genuine mercy that Vincent absolutely didn't deserve, and everyone knew that perfectly. But Isabella wasn't cruel like him. She was just an extraordinarily strong woman. Vincent slowly knelt on the Italian marble floor and began to wipe the cloth in the area where Isabella had danced magnificently. Each movement was a devastating public humiliation, but also a brutal lesson that criminal wealth doesn't make absolutely anyone superior to any other person. Meanwhile, Dr. Helena was urgently talking with Isabella in a low voice. "Dear, I direct Lincoln Center. We need to talk seriously about your professional future. What you just did cannot remain hidden from the city." Isabella looked at the $5,000 in her trembling hands, more money than she had seen together in entire years, and then at the elegant woman who spoke about the future as if it were really possible for someone like her. "I have 2 small children," she said hesitantly. "I can't just—" "Bring them," Dr. Helena interrupted. "Lincoln Center has an excellent daycare for employees' children. Isabella, you're too good to remain hidden working in cleaning. All of New York needs to see what you can do." Vincent finished cleaning the floor and stood up with his face red with deep shame and his tuxedo completely wrinkled. He had learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that true talent knows no social class or borders. "May I go now?" he asked with a hoarse voice of humiliation. "You may," Dr. Helena responded coldly, "but I sincerely hope you learned something important today about respect and humility." Vincent left the ballroom in heavy silence, followed by murmurs and looks of evident contempt from the guests. His reputation as a powerful and feared man had been destroyed by a 30-year-old woman he had tried to cruelly humiliate. Isabella put the money in her simple purse and looked around the ballroom, where 15 minutes before, she was just a completely invisible cleaning lady. Now she was the absolute center of attention of some of the most influential people in all of New York. Life had just completely changed in the blink of an eye. 6 months later, Lincoln Center was completely packed for the premiere of Manhattan Nights, a show created especially for Isabella Moretti, now known nationally as the cleaning lady who danced for life. In the front row, Thomas and Emma watched their mother with eyes shining with absolute pride. Thomas, at 8 years old, already told his school classmates with his chest puffed out, "My mother is the most famous ballerina in New York." Emma, at 5, simply repeated enchanted, "Mommy flies on stage like an angel." Dr. Helena Martinelli had absolutely fulfilled every promise made that transformative night at the casino. Isabella was hired as prima ballerina of Lincoln Center with a salary that allowed not only to support the family with dignity, but also to realize dreams that seemed completely impossible months ago. The 2-room apartment in the Bronx had given way to a comfortable 3-bedroom house in Manhattan, with a view of Central Park that Isabella had always dreamed of showing her children. Thomas was enrolled in an excellent private school with a full scholarship. Emma had finally completely treated the asthma that had tormented her since she was little. But the most beautiful transformation wasn't in the bank account or the new address, it was in Isabella's eyes. That special night, while she prepared to enter the Lincoln Center stage for the first time as absolute protagonist, Isabella thought about all the people who made that moment possible. Sophia Petrov was in the 3rd row at 79 years old, with a radiant smile that lit up her entire face. "I always knew this day would come," she had said the week before. "Talents like yours are too rare to remain hidden forever." Professor Santini was the conductor of the night, having accepted the special invitation to conduct at Isabella's premiere. "It is an immense honor," he said, emotionally. "A true artist deserves an absolutely perfect night." Richard Morrison, the critic who met Isabella the night of the Golden Crown Casino, was present to write the article that would appear on the front page of the newspaper the next day. His text was already half-ready mentally. Isabella Moretti is not just an exceptional ballerina. She is living proof that true talent transcends any social barrier, always finding its way to the light. Even some people from that fateful night had humbly requested tickets. Tony Marcelli and Veronica Castellano were in the audience now, genuine admirers of the woman they had helped humiliate 6 months before. "I have never felt so ashamed in my life," Veronica had confessed to her friends. "Seeing that woman dance was a lesson in humility I will never forget." But there was a notable and expected absence in the audience: Vincent Romano. In the months following that night, Vincent had experienced something completely new in his entire life: real consequences for his cruel acts. The video of his public humiliation had gone viral, watched by millions of people who celebrated Isabella's victory and condemned his brutal arrogance. His businesses began to suffer drastically. Clients cancelled contracts, partners distanced themselves, loyal employees resigned. Even other Mafia families began to see him with contempt. 3 weeks before Isabella's premiere, Vincent had personally sought out Dr. Helena Martinelli. "I would like to make a donation to Lincoln Center," he said, clearly uncomfortable. $100,000 without publicity, without quid pro quo, just an anonymous donation. Dr. Helena studied him with extreme care. "And why would you do that, Mr. Romano?" Vincent took time to respond, choosing his words. "Because I learned that humiliating people doesn't make me superior, it makes me smaller. And maybe it's time to try to repair some of the damage I caused for years." The donation was accepted and used to create a scholarship program for young dancers from underserved communities, with special focus on talents without financial resources. The program's name, Isabella Moretti Project, Talents Without Borders. Now, in the Lincoln Center dressing room, Isabella was finishing preparing for the most important performance of her entire life. The costume was a classic tutu in shades of blue and silver that made her look like a fairy tale princess. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Isabella, it was Dr. Helena. There's someone here who would like to speak with you before the performance." The door opened, and Vincent Romano entered the dressing room. He was completely different, more humble, without the arrogance that characterized him. He carried a simple bouquet of white lilies. "Isabella," he said with a hesitant voice, "I would like to sincerely apologize for what I did that night, for the way I treated you, for everything." Isabella observed him for a few seconds. She saw a man broken by his own evil, someone who had finally understood the weight of his actions. "I accept your apology," she said simply. "We all deserve a second chance to be better people." Vincent handed over the lilies with trembling hands. "You deserved everything good that happened and more, much more." He left the dressing room in silence, and Isabella smiled at the flowers. It was the closing of a painful cycle and the definitive beginning of her new life. 5 minutes later, she was on stage before 1,500 people standing, applauding even before the music began. When the first chords of Clair de Lune filled the theatre, Isabella began to dance, not just with perfect technique, but with the pure joy of someone who had recovered their dreams. In the audience, Thomas shouted, "Go, Mommy!" and Emma clapped her little hands with total enthusiasm. Dr. Helena watched from the wings, with tears in her eyes. Sometimes she thought life gives us exactly the beautiful story we needed to see. When the curtain closed after 15 minutes of standing ovation, Isabella smiled, looking at Vincent's lilies in her dressing room. She had forgiven, but mainly she had won. The invisible cleaning lady had become an unforgettable star, and her light would shine forever. Isabella's story shows that no talent deserves to be erased, and that dignity should never be humiliated. Often those who seem invisible carry a light capable of transforming the entire world.